When people think of America, they often imagine a nation built on equality, a country where anyone, regardless of birth, could rise through hard work and determination. It's a powerful idea. And for millions, it became reality. But long before America became the world's greatest democracy, another story was quietly unfolding. A story of enormous estates, powerful families, political dynasties, and inherited wealth that passed from one generation to the next. Before there were billionaires, before Wall Street, before the White House, there were bloodlines. Families whose names appeared again and again in colonial records. Families who controlled land, trade, government, and eventually the future of an entire nation. Some of these surnames still appear in American politics. Others became industrial giants, bankers, military leaders, or presidents. Many Americans have never heard of them. Yet their influence shaped the country from its very beginning. This is not a story about secret societies. It is not about hidden conspiracies. Everything you'll hear today comes from historical documents, land records, family archives, government papers, and the writings of respected historians. This is the forgotten story of the 20 bloodlines behind America's elite. To understand how these families rose to power, we must travel back more than 400 years to a dangerous wilderness on the edge of the known world. The year was 1607. 3 small English ships, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery, finally reached the coast of Virginia after months at sea. On board were just over 100 settlers. Most believed they had arrived in a land filled with limitless opportunity. Instead, they stepped into a nightmare. The marshes surrounding Jamestown carried disease. Clean drinking water was scarce. Food quickly disappeared. Many settlers were gentlemen with little experience farming or surviving in the wilderness. Within months, death became an everyday sight. Disease spread rapidly. Hunger weakened the survivors. Conflicts with local Native American tribes made survival even more difficult. By the end of the first year, more than half of the colony was gone. Many believed Jamestown would become another failed English settlement, yet the colony survived, not because life became easier, but because a few determined individuals refused to let it disappear. As new settlers arrived from England, something unexpected happened. Virginia began changing from a desperate outpost into an economic opportunity unlike anything England had ever seen. The reason had a single name: tobacco. When John Rolfe successfully cultivated a sweeter variety of tobacco suitable for European markets, everything changed. Demand exploded. Ships crossed the Atlantic, carrying Virginia tobacco back to England. Prices soared. Plantation owners became wealthy almost overnight. For the first time, America wasn't simply a colony struggling to survive. It was becoming a business, and wherever enormous wealth appears, power soon follows. The English crown encouraged settlement by offering land, huge amounts of land. Men willing to finance voyages or bring laborers to Virginia received thousands of acres. The system rewarded those who already possessed money and connections. Land wasn't simply property. It represented political influence, economic security, and social status. A wealthy planter controlled fields, workers, warehouses, river access, and local trade. The larger the plantation, the greater the family's influence became. Soon, these plantation owners began serving as local judges, military officers, tax collectors, members of colonial assemblies. In Virginia, money and politics became inseparable. The richest landowners often became the colony's political leaders. Those political leaders then created laws protecting landowners like themselves. The cycle reinforced itself year after year. While ordinary settlers struggled to survive, a small group of families accumulated extraordinary wealth. But they understood something even more valuable than money. Wealth could disappear, land could be lost, political offices changed hands, family could preserve everything. marriage became one of the most powerful political tools in colonial America. These elite families rarely married outside their social circle. Instead, the son of one wealthy planter married the daughter of another. Plantation combined, fortunes merged, political alliances strengthened. Generation after generation, power remained concentrated among a remarkably small number of interconnected families. If one family faced financial trouble, marriage often restored its fortune. If another sought greater political influence, a carefully arranged marriage opened new doors. Family trees slowly became networks of power. By the early 18th century, Virginia's ruling class looked less like a collection of separate households and more like one enormous extended family. Historians would later refer to many of them as the first families of Virginia. The title wasn't official, no king awarded it, no law defined it. Instead, it reflected reputation, influence, education, wealth, and generations of public service. Membership wasn't based on a single ancestor. It developed naturally over decades as certain families repeatedly occupied the highest positions in colonial society. These families built elegant brick mansions overlooking rivers, imported expensive furniture from London, sent their sons to England for educations, purchased fine clothing, collected libraries, hosted lavish dinners. To poorer settlers arriving from Europe, these estates looked remarkably similar to the homes of English nobility. Officially, America had no aristocracy. There were no dukes, no earls, no hereditary titles. Yet an unofficial aristocracy had already emerged. It simply used different names. Instead of castles, there were plantations. Instead of noble titles, there were respected surnames. Instead of royal courts, there were colonial assemblies. Power had simply changed its appearance. Among the earliest and most influential families were names that would become legendary: the Randolphs, the Carters, the Lees, the Byrds, the Masons, the Fairfaxes, the Harrisons, the Washingtons. Each accumulated enormous land holdings. Each produced politicians, military officers, judges, and influential businessmen. Many were connected through marriage. Some families owned tens of thousands of acres. Others controlled important ports or river crossings. Several generations often lived on the same estates. Children inherited not only wealth, but expectations. A son born into one of these households rarely started life as an ordinary farmer. He inherited education, business connections, political relationships, and a respected family name. In colonial America, a surname could open doors long before a young man spoke his first words in public. The Washington family offers one of history's best examples. Long before George Washington became America's first president, the Washingtons had already established themselves among Virginia's respected landowning families. George inherited advantages unavailable to most colonists. He received surveying opportunities, military appointments, access to influential neighbors. Marriage into another wealthy family dramatically increased his fortune. His rise was certainly shaped by ability, but it was also strengthened by connections built over generations. The same pattern appeared repeatedly across colonial Virginia. Talent mattered, hard work mattered, but family networks often determined who received the greatest opportunities. By the middle of the 18th century, a traveler visiting Virginia would notice something striking. The same surnames appeared everywhere: court records, land, deeds, government appointments, military commissions, church leadership, business partnerships. These weren't isolated coincidences. They reflected a society where influence flowed through family relationships as much as through elections or appointments. The foundations of America's future elite had already been laid. And this was only the beginning, because the next generation of these powerful families would face a challenge unlike anything their ancestors had imagined. A revolution that would destroy British rule, transform colonies into a nation, and elevate several of these bloodlines from wealthy landowners to the founders of the United States itself. The American Revolution changed everything. Or at least, that's what many people believed. The British flag came down, a new republic was born, kings and hereditary titles were rejected. The United States declared that all men were created equal. But while the political system changed, many of the people holding power remained remarkably familiar. The revolution did not erase America's wealthiest families. Instead, it gave many of them an even greater role in shaping the nation's future. The men who signed declarations, led armies, drafted constitutions, and governed the first states often came from families that had already accumulated generations of wealth and influence. The old colonial elite simply became the leadership of a new country. One of the most powerful examples was the Lee family of Virginia. Their influence stretched across nearly every part of colonial society. For generations, the Lees owned vast plantations along Virginia's rivers. Their wealth came from agriculture, trade, and land. But unlike many wealthy families, the Lees also developed an extraordinary tradition of public service. Richard Henry Lee became one of the strongest voices for independence. In June 1776, he introduced the resolution declaring that the American colonies were free and independent states. Without that moment, the Declaration of Independence may never have been written in the form we know today. His brother, Francis Lightfoot Lee, also signed the Declaration. Two brothers, both founding fathers. Few families could claim such influence, yet the Lee legacy continued long after the Revolution. Generations later, another member of the family, Robert E. Lee, became one of America's most famous military commanders during the Civil War. Whether admired or criticized today, his name remains deeply connected to American history. The Lee family demonstrates something important. Influence often survives political change. Governments may rise and fall, but established families frequently adapt. Another remarkable dynasty was the Randolph family. By the 18th century, the Randolphs had become one of Virginia's wealthiest and most politically connected families. Their estates covered enormous areas of fertile land. Their children married into nearly every major elite family in the colony. Thomas Jefferson himself was connected to the Randolphs through his mother's family. John Marshall, America's longest-serving Chief Justice, also shared family connections with this powerful network. Edmund Randolph became the first Attorney General of the United States. Later, he served as the nation's second Secretary of State. Few American families produced so many influential public officials in such a short period. To historians, the Randolphs represented something larger than individual success. They symbolized how political leadership often remained concentrated within interconnected family circles. Another family quietly building extraordinary wealth was the Carter family. If land measured power, the Carters stood near the very top. Robert King Carter earned his nickname for a reason. At one point, he controlled more than 300,000 acres of land across Virginia. His plantations generated enormous profits through tobacco production. He served as acting governor of Virginia and became one of the wealthiest men in colonial America. His descendants inherited not only property, but social prestige. The Carter name remained respected for generations. Even today, historic Carter estates attract visitors interested in America's colonial past. Nearby stood another famous household, the Byrd family. William Byrd of Fairfaxes arrived in Virginia during the 17th century and built a fortune through trade and land ownership. His son, William Byrd II, expanded the family's influence even further. Unlike many colonial planters, Byrd was exceptionally educated. He maintained one of America's largest private libraries. He corresponded with intellectuals in Europe. He helped establish the city of Richmond. His journals provide historians with invaluable insights into colonial life. The Byrds demonstrated that influence came not only from wealth, but also from education and culture. Knowledge itself became another form of power. Meanwhile, the Fairfax family represented an unusual connection between America and British nobility. Unlike most colonial elites, the Fairfaxes actually held hereditary titles in England. Thomas Fairfax owned millions of acres across Virginia. His estate became one of the largest private landholdings in North America. Young George Washington worked as a land surveyor on Fairfax property. That opportunity introduced him to influential landowners and helped launch his career. Without the Fairfax connection, Washington's early path might have looked very different. History often turns on opportunities that seem ordinary at the time. Another family leaving a lasting mark was the Masons. George Mason never became president, yet his ideas influenced nearly every American citizen. He drafted the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Its principles inspired many protections later included in the United States Bill of Rights: freedom of religion, freedom of the press, trial by jury, limitations on government power. These concepts became foundations of American democracy, although Mason refused to sign the Constitution because it lacked stronger protections for individual rights. His influence remained undeniable. Sometimes, history remembers the loudest voices, but it is often shaped by those working quietly behind the scenes. By the end of the 18th century, America had defeated Britain. The Constitution had been written. George Washington became the nation's first president. At first glance, the revolution appeared complete. But beneath the surface, old family networks remained remarkably intact. Many governors still came from established colonial families. Judges often belonged to respected bloodlines. Business partnerships frequently developed between relatives. Marriage continued strengthening political alliances. The new republic rejected inherited titles, yet inherited influence never disappeared. In many ways, the revolution transformed America's government faster than it transformed its social hierarchy. The nation's leaders genuinely believed in liberty. Many sacrificed fortunes during the war. Some risked execution for supporting independence. Their accomplishments deserve recognition. At the same time, historical records reveal another reality. The opportunities available to elite families often exceeded those available to ordinary citizens. Education, land, connections, credit, political introductions. These advantages accumulated across generations. Success rarely began from equal starting points. This pattern wasn't unique to America. Throughout history, whether in Rome, England, France, or China, established families often remained influential despite revolutions, wars, or political reforms. America proved no exception. The faces changed, the flag changed, the government changed. But many of the same surnames continued appearing in positions of leadership. Their descendants entered Congress, led universities, expanded businesses, and shaped national policy. As the young republic grew westward, new fortunes emerged alongside old ones. Industrialization was approaching. Railroads would soon cross the continent. Banks would replace plantations as symbols of wealth. Factories would create fortunes larger than anything colonial America had ever imagined. Some of the old bloodlines adapted beautifully to this changing world. Others slowly faded into history. And entirely new dynasties would soon rise. Families whose names would become synonymous with unimaginable wealth. The Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Morgans, the Rockefellers. They were not colonial aristocrats, but they understood the same timeless lesson. In America, power could be built, wealth could grow, and once established, a family legacy could endure for generations. The 19th century transformed America faster than anyone could have imagined. The nation expanded westward. Factories replaced small workshops. Railroads connected distant cities. Banks financed enormous industries, and a new kind of elite began to emerge. Unlike the old plantation families, these men built fortunes through steel, oil, railroads, finance, and manufacturing. Yet something interesting happened. Instead of replacing America's old elite, many of these new industrial giants became part of the same social world. Marriage, business partnerships, and political influence connected old bloodlines with new fortunes. One of the first great fortunes belonged to the Astor family. John Jacob Astor arrived in America as an immigrant with almost nothing. Through the fur trade, real estate, and Carroll investments, he became the richest man in the United States. His descendants purchased grand estates, funded museums, and entered high society. Within just a few generations, the Astors stood beside families whose roots stretched back to colonial America. Another family changed transportation forever, the Vanderbilts. Cornelius Vanderbilt began with a small ferry business. His determination turned a modest operation into a transportation empire, steamships, railroads, investment. One success led to another. By the time of his death, he had accumulated one of the largest fortunes in American history. His children built magnificent mansions in New York and Newport. Their wealth became a symbol of America's Gilded Age. But money alone wasn't enough. Acceptance into elite society required connections. Over time, the Vanderbilts married into established families, blending new wealth with old prestige. Then came the man who transformed the oil industry forever, John D. Rockefeller. Through Standard Oil, Rockefeller built a business unlike anything America had seen before. By improving efficiency and expanding carefully, he created one of the largest business empires in history. His fortune reached unimaginable levels, yet Rockefeller believed wealth carried responsibility. His family donated billions, adjusted for today's value, to education, medical research, and public health, universities, foundations, hospitals. Many still bear the Rockefeller name today. At the same time, another powerful figure reshaped American finance, J.P. Morgan. Unlike industrialists who manufactured products, Morgan organized money itself. He financed railroads, stabilized struggling companies, helped rescue the American financial system during periods of crisis. Governments respected him. Business leaders depended on him. His influence reached far beyond banking. By the beginning of the 20th century, a handful of financial families possessed influence that extended across entire industries. Although these industrial dynasties were different from the colonial bloodlines, their goals often looked remarkably similar: protect family wealth, expand influence, create opportunities for future generations. Many established charitable foundations, others entered politics. Some funded universities and museums. Their names became part of America's cultural landscape. As the decades passed, the distinction between old aristocratic families and new business dynasties slowly disappeared. Marriage connected them, business connected them, education connected them. Prestigious universities became gathering places where influential families met, formed friendships, and created lifelong networks. By the early 20th century, America's elite was no longer defined only by inherited land. It was also defined by finance, industry, education, and national influence. The foundations of modern American wealth had been built. But one final question remained. What happened to these bloodlines over the next 100 years? Did they disappear, or do their legacies still shape America today? By the beginning of the 20th century, America had become the world's fastest growing industrial nation. The old plantation owners were no longer the only symbols of wealth. Railroad magnates, oil tycoons, bankers, steel manufacturers, and financiers had joined the ranks of the nation's elite. Yet one thing remained surprisingly consistent: power often stayed within families. Children inherited more than money. They inherited education, business connections, political relationships, and a respected surname. These advantages opened doors long before a career even began. But history also shows that influence was never guaranteed forever. Some famous bloodlines expanded their fortunes across generations. Others slowly lost their wealth through poor investments. Economic crises, or the simple division of estates among descendants, a family name alone could not preserve success. Each generation faced its own challenges. The Great Depression destroyed fortunes that had taken decades to build. The Civil War transformed the South forever. Thousands of plantations disappeared. Entire family fortunes vanished almost overnight. Industrial monopolies faced government regulation. New taxes reduced inherited wealth. The world changed, and America's elite changed with it. Still, many of the great families adapted. Instead of relying only on land, they invested in banks, corporations, universities, and charitable foundations. Names like Rockefeller, Mellon, DuPont, Morgan, and Ford became associated not only with business, but also with philanthropy. Libraries were built, hospitals were funded, scholarships helped educate millions of students. Scientific research received enormous financial support. Museums preserved history for future generations. Some of America's greatest public institutions exist today because wealthy families chose to donate large portions of their fortunes. This created another kind of legacy, not political, not military, but educational and cultural. Over time, America's definition of elite continued evolving. Success was no longer limited to inherited land or family ancestry. Entrepreneurs built companies from garages. Immigrants arrived with almost nothing and created global businesses. Scientists, inventors, athletes, actors, and technology founders joined the ranks of the nation's wealthiest citizens. The American dream remained very much alive, yet family influence never disappeared completely. Studies have shown that children born into wealthy households often receive advantages beyond financial inheritance. Better education, professional networks, business opportunities, access to influential circles. These advantages do not guarantee success, but they often provide opportunities unavailable to others. This pattern exists in nearly every society throughout history. It is not unique to America. What makes America different is that new families continue joining the ranks of the elite. Unlike many old European aristocracies, America constantly creates new fortunes. The names change, the industries change, but the cycle continues. Today's technology entrepreneurs may become tomorrow's historic dynasties. Future historians may study today's business founders, the same way we study the Carters, the Lees, the Rockefellers, or the Morgans. History is always being written. As we look back across more than 4 centuries, one truth becomes clear. America never developed a legal aristocracy. There were no kings, no hereditary titles, no official nobility, but influential families certainly existed. Some earned their positions through military service, others through business, others through politics. Many combined all three. Their stories remind us that history is rarely simple. Great achievements often came alongside enormous privilege. Extraordinary success often required extraordinary opportunity. Understanding these bloodlines does not diminish America's history. It helps explain it. The nation's development was shaped by pioneers, farmers, workers, inventors, immigrants, soldiers, and yes, powerful families whose influence stretched across generations. Each played a role in building the country we know today. Some surnames have disappeared from public attention. Others remain familiar around the world, but all of them left footprints across American history. Their homes still stand. Their letters remain preserved in archives. Their signatures appear on historic documents. Their decisions influenced wars, governments, businesses, and millions of ordinary lives. The story of America's elite is not simply a story about wealth. It is a story about legacy, about how families pass down values, ambitions, opportunities, and responsibilities from one generation to the next. Some legacies inspired progress. Others reflected the inequalities of their time. History records both. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. No family remains powerful forever. No fortune lasts without wise stewardship. No surname alone guarantees greatness. Every generation must choose how it will use the opportunities it inherits. Some build, some preserve, some lose everything. And some create an entirely new legacy that changes history once again. The 20 bloodlines we've explored today were among the most influential families in early American history. Their stories reveal how wealth, power, and opportunity shaped the birth of a nation, but they also remind us that history belongs to more than just famous names. Behind every great estate stood countless workers. Behind every political leader stood ordinary citizens. Behind every fortune stood an entire society helping build the nation together. Understanding both sides of that story gives us a clearer picture of America's past, and perhaps a better understanding of its future. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to explore more forgotten stories from history, be sure to subscribe and join us in the next journey through the past, because history is never truly behind us. It continues to shape the world we live in today. The end.